Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me here again for another Tuesday edition episode. Well, today we're going to kind of touch on what we talked about last Tuesday, which has just been a whole lot of real life for me lately, not a whole lot of business lessons or anything like that. But I told you last Tuesday that my daughter Hattie and I were going to be setting off on our annual father-daughter trip over to Yellowstone National Park sometime this month. Well, we just got back. Let's see, as I write and record this, we just got back last night. So as this is coming out to you on Tuesday, we've been home for 2 days, I guess. We got home on Sunday evening. And as I was thinking about what to talk about in this episode and trying to come up with that, I just couldn't let it go. I know I talked about it last week, but there's so much cool stuff involving agriculture coming out here that I just wanted to bring it up to you. I'm sure that you all have something like this wherever it is that you live. Those of you who live in Idaho here too, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. But those of you who don't, those of you who live in Ohio or Arkansas or wherever it may be, I'm sure you've got your own version of this, and hopefully this brings a smile to your face. So we had this trip coming up. I'm just going to give you an update on our trip. So our trip, we go over there, and it, I will tell you, it's one of these things that makes me smile. You never know who your kids are going to turn out to be. And in a lot of ways, Hattie has turned out, how would I say it? I got to be careful here. It almost sounds like I'm going down a negative road. I'm not at all. Love my daughter. But and if I would have designed Hattie, then there's certain aspects of her personality that would be different. Is that too honest? I think there's probably a lot of parents who would say something very similar to that. She just surprises me in certain ways that she went different than me. And that's probably narcissism on my part, that she didn't just turn out exactly like me or something like that. But on this trip, man, she always surprises me, and it brings such a smile to my face. So she loves being out there. She loves going out in search of wildlife. It's really, really cool. It's a lot of fun to go do this with her. We can kind of reconnect on a level that really only she and I share. In terms of our little nuclear family here. So it's a really, really fun trip. It's really cool to reconnect with her in this way. Now, we connect in a lot of different ways. Softball, livestock, the farm and all that type of stuff. But truly, I never see the drive like she has. Well, maybe in softball I do. But the drive that she's got for this trip and for the tradition and for what we do the whole time. I mean, a lot of people would find this trip unbelievably boring. A lot of people would. But for us, it's a good time, and we've got these quirky little traditions, and it's a lot of fun. But anyway, I wanted to give you a recap on this trip before I kind of talked about what the title of this episode means. Here is the count. Here's what we saw. Let's see. We saw no moose. We saw 2 grizzly bear. And by the way, I bring up no moose because we have been on a moose quest. A moose, other than the very, very difficult things to see, like a cougar or a bobcat or a lynx or something like that, other than those things, we've seen everything except a moose. Now, I've seen 1 million moose in my life. In Idaho, in Montana, here, there, everywhere, you're always bumping into moose, it seems like, if you live in this Rocky Mountain front. Even over in Boise. We had a moose in a park in Nampa, Idaho, just a few weeks ago. It was on the news. I don't even know where the thing came from. But no matter how hard we try, we cannot find a moose for Hattie. So Hattie has still never seen a moose. So this year's trip, the theme was we were on a moose quest, and we still have not found a moose for Hattie. So we saw no moose, 2 grizzly bears. The first one was really cool. We were driving down this road. We were going out towards the southeast entrance of Yellowstone, which is on your way to Cody, Wyoming. And we were over there because that's where we've always been able to find grizzly bears. And we're over there looking for bears. We didn't find any. It was snowing really hard on us. And we talked to some people that said there'd been one out, but the park rangers had scared it off. But they thought it might be coming back. So we're going up and down this road trying to find one. Anyway, this vehicle in front of us, this Blazer that's in front of us, all of a sudden stops really abruptly, cockeyed on the road. Always a sure sign they've seen something. So they get out of the Blazer. So we pull up, and I jump out, and I'm like, hey, what'd you guys find? And they're looking down in this draw below us. So there's a big grizzly bear down there. We just saw it, and we're trying to find it again. So they hop back in their Blazer, and they're driving up the road really slowly, looking down in this draw, trying to see if they can see this bear again. And we're kind of doing the same thing behind them, going along. It's snowing pretty hard. And all of a sudden, I tell Hattie, I go, maybe we should circle around because the road makes a hairpin turn and comes back the other way, and we could look back down in this draw a little better. And so we're kind of coming up with a different plan, thinking that we've probably passed this bear by now. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this bear just comes barreling up out of the trees in between the Blazer and our pickup, just right between us, right across the road, and up the hill on the other side. It was unreal. And seriously, it was running so hard, it almost ran into that Blazer. It just barely missed just running into the Blazer by 1 or 2 feet. It was pretty cool. And then we saw another grizzly bear. Another guy had spotted it, and we pulled off and got out the spotting scope and the binoculars, and we were able to look at that. And that was a big boar that we saw out there in the Lamar Valley of Yellowstone. But the first grizzly bear seemed young. You don't see big boars, at least in my experience. I've never seen big boars that really will run like that, that'll appear to be that scared. They'll move away from you, hopefully, but generally at their own pace because they know they're king of the forest. So, but this one I think was a little bit younger because it was moving pretty good. Let's see, we saw 3 black bears. That was one sow with 2 cubs, which is always really cool. I'll come back to that one in a minute. 5 wolves, so just a small pack of wolves we were able to watch through the spotting scope. All of them were black. It was interesting. They're not always the same color, but these were all black. 2 coyotes, which always makes us laugh. I mean, we see tons of coyotes and hear tons of coyotes out on our farm and hunt coyotes and shoot coyotes and foxes to protect our chickens and our goats and all sorts of stuff. But in Yellowstone, man, people will almost wreck their cars to get out and get a picture of a coyote. And we're just like, what in the world are you doing? But, to each their own. We saw 3 river otters, which was cool. Somebody pointed those out to us, and they were hard to see because it was in a really heavy snowfall. But one of them was swimming around, so it made it easy to watch. And then I took a couple pictures. I don't know how well they're going to turn out. I'll try and put them up on the show notes if you want to take a look at them. But 3 river otters, which is cool. Never seen a river otter in Yellowstone before. And then too many elk, too many buffalo, too many mule deer, and too many antelope to count. No question about that. So just tons of buffalo. It was neat. I've been going to Yellowstone since I was in college in Bozeman at this place right here, Montana State University, and we used to always go down there. We'd get a season pass, and we'd share it. I think that's cheating, but that's what we did in college. And we would always make runs down there and always saw buffalo, but there was one mountainside, one hillside we saw on this trip where it could have been the 1800s. I mean, they were so thick and so lined out all up and down this mountain. They looked like just a bunch of flies on food or something like that off on the hillside. It was really, really cool to see. I grow more and more appreciation for buffalo each and every time we go, and they're just such a large bovine. They're just unbelievably big. And actually, we were behind 2 cars on a bridge going towards Mammoth Hot Springs, and there was a buffalo crossing the bridge in front of the 3 of us. And it's the first time I've ever really seen a bull buffalo get feisty, but it stopped and turned towards this little Honda Civic. It's way taller than this little car. Its head is bigger than the passenger's compartment, and I don't even think I'm joking on that. I don't even think I'm exaggerating. And it threw its head at this car. It did not headbutt the car, but it came close. That was impressive. I don't know what would have happened if it had really gone after that Honda Civic, but oh my goodness, I can't imagine being those folks inside of that car. It was really cool. Well, anyway, lots of snow this year. Not much of it stuck. There was enough to make for some icy roads on different days, no question about that. And it was a lot of fun with Hattie again because we'd get back to camp. We took some really good firewood from off our farm and hauled it in there because generally when we buy firewood, we've done it once. We bought firewood at the campground we stay at the Madison campground in Yellowstone, and it's always wet. It doesn't burn that good. So I had some really good seasoned wood here, and we took that with us. So we had some good fires, but we got really lucky we had that wood because every night around the campfire, it just dumped snow on us. It never really piled up too much. It was around 33, 32, 31 degrees. So it really didn't stick too much. It stuck enough to cover the ground, but didn't really pile up. But man, it really, really came down. But we had a good fire going, and we had good gear, so we could stand there by the fire and be warm, let it snow on us. eat our dinner by the fire. It was a lot of fun to do that. And, Hattie and I started doing this trip when she was 10. She's now 13. So this is the fourth trip we've done. And it's been a lot of fun doing this trip on the same weekend every year and being able to look back and watch her grow up as I reminisce over these trips. Now, the first two we did, I had my old 2003 Dodge 3/4-ton pickup, and I had a camper shell on that truck. So we actually just built a bed out of lumber and plywood in the back and put some air mattresses on it so we could store stuff under the bed and we could sleep up on there. And we just slept in the camper shell at night, and then I had a little heater, a safe Mr. Buddy heater or whatever that is, inside the camper shell. And I would run that to kind of take the edge off in the morning or in the evening when we'd play Monopoly in that camper shell somehow laying in our sleeping bags. It was not easy, but we did it. And so we did that for the first 2 years, but then I sold that pickup and I bought a new truck, and this one I don't have a camper shell on. So for the last 2 years, I've rented a travel trailer when we do this trip. And I got a reason for that, and the reason is not that I am afraid of camping in a tent in the cold. I've done it a million times. I've got a great hunting tent that I can put a stove in. No problem at all. I'm totally happy to do that. But if you're wondering what the answer is, why I don't just do this in a tent, it's because of bears. Now, am I being paranoid? Maybe I am. But I've had a couple close encounters over my lifetime with grizzly bears. One really close encounter with a huge boar. And I don't want to have that encounter again. That was a very, very humbling experience. And so, the grizzlies are no longer endangered. Now, there is some debate going on over that right now, but both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service delisted them, took them off the endangered species list. Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. I don't think Montana was going to do it, but this year, Idaho and Wyoming were both going to have hunting seasons for grizzly bears, and then a lawsuit was filed, and a judge put a stay on all of that, so that got canceled. But the reason I bring this up is because right now, around the Island Park area of Idaho, areas of Wyoming, areas of Montana, surrounding the national park, and in other areas up and down the Rocky Mountains, there's been a lot of conflicts with grizzly bears. And I happen to know quite a few people in the Fish and Game Service, and I've heard some of the stories of things that aren't stories that you necessarily hear about in the mainstream media. And I'm not going conspiracy theory on you or anything like that, but when I heard some of these stories, I was blown away. Like, well, how have I never heard of this? And it made me go, you know what? I'm not camping in grizzly country in a tent. Just not going to do it. And to reinforce that, by the way, on the eastern side of Yellowstone Park, so over towards Cook City or down towards Cody, Wyoming, if you're in the park in a campground or you're outside the park in a national forest campground, they do not allow you to camp in anything but a hard-sided trailer. And that's because of grizzly bears. So if that tells you anything, they've got restrictions. They won't let you camp in a tent or a tent trailer. It's got to be hard-sided. So I just went ahead and applied that to the western side of the park where we camp in the Madison campground and said, when we go on this trip, especially in the fall when they're getting ready for winter, we're going to be in a hard-sided something. So a camper shell or now a trailer that I rent. So that's all right. It gets us out of the weather, makes it easier to play Monopoly or this time Scrabble at night. So it was fun. And as Hattie gets older, she's 13 now, she cooked dinner almost every night for us, which was really cool. And I mentioned that sow and two cubs earlier. I said I'd come back to that. One of the things I really enjoyed about connecting with Hattie on this trip was so if you've never been to Yellowstone, the road system kind of makes an 8. If you were to picture an 8, you've got a road that goes up the west side, loops around, and comes back around, and I don't know, maybe 8 is the wrong description. But anyway, you can make a couple different loops through the park. Well, we had done a long loop on our first day. We had gone south past Old Faithful. We had stopped there. Then we'd gone down almost to the south entrance of the park, which takes you out to Jackson, Wyoming. We'd turned around and come back. This is on our moose quest. Came back up to Yellowstone Lake, pulled off at there's a big historic hotel there. Went in, and Hattie got a coffee. She used to get hot chocolate. She used to be 10. Now she's 13, so all right. She got some sort of thing, a mocha thing. I don't know what it is. And we hung out there for a minute. Then we went down that road to the southeast entrance. That's when we saw the grizzly bear. Then we backtracked, we came back, and then went north up to Canyon Village. Now, at Canyon Village, there is a junction, and you can either go north. We were coming from the south, so you can go north, you can go south, or you can go west. It was about 5:30, 5:45 in the evening, and if we were to go to west, we had about 26 miles back to our camp. If we went north, you go over this big pass where we've seen grizzly bears before. We spotted them with the binoculars and the spotting scope. And then you go all the way up to the north entrance in Gardner and Mammoth Hot Springs, which is just on the other side of the boundary from Gardner, Montana. And then you can loop back around, come down the western side of the park, and then through Norris Junction and on into the Madison Campground at the Madison Junction, which goes out to West Yellowstone, Montana. So I asked Hattie, what do you want to do? She looked worn out. She looked tired. It's been a long day in the pickup driving around looking for wildlife. And she's like, keep going. Keep going. And so we kept going. I loved her persistence. And you know what? There was some wisdom in that. It wasn't another 30 minutes, and we bumped into that black bear sow with the 2 cubs, which was really cool. And that's the only black bear we saw on the trip. So it really worked out. So that was very, very cool. But anyway, that's my update on the trip, everybody. So really what I wanted to talk about in this episode was the drive from Kuna, from our farm in Kuna, to Yellowstone National Park. And I titled it Across the Fruited Snake River Plain, as a play on words about the United States, the fruited plain. But really, we drive across the Snake River Plain all the way over to the mountains. So we basically skirt the southern part of the Idaho mountains all the way across the Snake River Plain and until it takes us up into the headwaters of the Snake River in that area and into Yellowstone National Park. And it always blows me away, too, because if Lewis and Clark, when they went over the Continental Divide the first time, if they would have just gone south, just 75 miles, they would have had such an easy journey. But they went north into the Bitterroot Mountains, and you can read up on it, and they got rescued by the Nez Perce Indians. And, man, if they'd just gone south, it would have been so easy for them. But anyway, that's the way we went, was on the southern edge of the Idaho mountains, and the way it loops around and kind of follows the Snake River. Well, that drive takes about 6.5 to 7 hours for us, depending on conditions, road construction, all of that. And I have done this drive a million times because when I was going to school at Montana State in Bozeman, and I was doing an internship in Boise selling ag chemicals, I was making that run back and forth all the time. And so this is the route I would always take. And so I've done it a million times. Very, very easy drive for me to do. I really, really enjoy it, but it's definitely a longer drive for Hattie. It feels longer to her than it does to me. And I started, along this drive and thinking about this episode, wondering why that is. Why is it longer for her than it is for me? And so first, let me tell you what my route is, because there's basically 2 routes you can take from Kuna over to West Yellowstone, which is where we enter the national park. Now, you can go on I-84, the interstate, and follow that all the way around the southern part of Idaho until it splits and I-84 goes to Salt Lake City, and then you'd stay on I-86, which takes you over to Pocatello, Idaho. And then when you get to Pocatello, you'd merge onto I-15. You would go north to Idaho Falls. You'd get off on Highway 20, and you'd follow US 20 all the way to West Yellowstone. That would be the main route. It's interstate the whole way. You almost never would have to stop, I guess, until you get into Idaho Falls. Speed limit's 80 miles an hour most of the way. That's probably the choice of most people. Another route you can take is you can take Interstate 84 to Mountain Home, right on the outskirts of Mountain Home, get on Highway 20 right there, and you can go across and go on 2-lane roads all the way across directly, almost due east, all the way across on the northern side of the Snake River Plain, all the way across to Rexburg, Idaho, and then meet up with where you would have been had you taken the other route and go on up to West Yellowstone. Well, this is the route I take. I never take the interstate. I've never actually ever done that, except for the very first time I came to Boise and I was moving to Bozeman. And I was 19 and I was moving up there. I took that route because I didn't know better and the weather was horrible. But other than that, I've never, ever taken that interstate route. I always take this route. And I make a joke in here that I must have something in common with Robert Frost because I definitely choose the road less taken when you do this route. But I really, really like it, and I just have no desire to be on interstate for this trip. I love this path. But as I think about why I like this route so much, it's because of all the agriculture I get to look at along the way. Now, if I follow the interstate, yes, I'm going to see agriculture, but you know what I'm talking about. It's just not the same. I'm not going through all the small towns. I'm not, waving at farmers as we go by, at 35 miles an hour going through their town or pulling off or whatever it may be. And you just don't get the same feel or the same look at the farming and the agriculture along the way. So and this route I take when I go across Highway 20, I go through, between Kuna and West Yellowstone, I go through 11 towns. That's it. And I actually don't even go through Kuna because our farm is east of Kuna. So I just leave out of here and head off. So we don't even go through Kuna. And the biggest town on this whole route is Rexburg, Idaho, 28,000 people. And I just barely touch the outskirts of it when I get there. I get on the 2-lane going north to West Yellowstone and just barely touch it. And the next biggest town is Mountain Home, which I barely scrape that too, and that's 14,000 people. Other than that, we're talking postage stamp towns, and that's it. And I really, really like it. So I'll hit towns with names like Howe, Peekaboo, Mud Lake, Island Park, and Arco along the way. The last one of those, Arco, Idaho, first city ever to be lit by atomic power. Little trivia for you there. I get to see sites like Craters of the Moon, National Monument on this drive, several ancient volcanoes to just sit out there on the Snake River Plain with nothing around them, and they just jut up out of nowhere. The old cinder cones. Really, really cool to see. And, of course, along the way, I get to observe a lot of agriculture. And, being interested in the crops, the machinery, the people, and the varying growing seasons, because it changes a lot from here in Kuna to when I get over to eastern Idaho. It really makes that drive go by fast for me, getting to watch and see all of that. And there's always something outside my windshield to do with agriculture that just keeps me interested. And really, it really starts for me in the Camas Prairie. So if you're looking at your map, if you're following along on the map right now, when I go east out of Mountain Home on Highway 20, I will get up into an area called the Camas Prairie. Really, the main town there is Fairfield, Idaho, and it's awesome up there. Everything's up at about 5,000 feet. You wouldn't even notice Fairfield if the speed limit didn't get reduced to 45 and they didn't force you to slow down. And there's a lot of hay grown up there, a lot of center pivots. And, man, it is brutal. It's brutal country. It's beautiful country. Beautiful. 5,000 foot. It's bordered by mountains on the north and mountains on the south. And it's got a short growing season. And then in the winter, it's one of the coldest spots in Idaho. The wind blows and blows and blows. And they get a lot of snow. They get snow in the feet, and it drifts. I mean, it is a tough place to live, a tough place to farm. But, man, it's a gorgeous place in the summer, in the spring, in the fall. And so that's really where it starts for me, seeing all just the pivots and the hay fields and the hay stacks and, the ton bales and everything all stacked up. And, man, they're growing some just incredible hay out there. And you can tell because they are putting the effort in to take very, very good care of this hay. Everything is tarped over, and I'm not just talking tarped on the top, but tarped 360 degrees to keep the quality of this hay. It's really impressive to watch. And, of course, everything I go through on this drive is interlaced by going through high desert and BLM grazing land. So as you leave the Camas Prairie, you do a climb into some high desert, and then you'll descend back down into the southern end, the bottom end of the Wood River Valley. And the Wood River Valley is where Sun Valley and Ketchum and all those resort towns of Idaho are located. But in the bottom end, I don't go through those towns, but in the bottom end, there's lots of grazing land, lots of bottom lands that have flooded in the past, and really, really good pastures, lots of cattle down there, sheep. It's a great place to go through. And then I'll make my way through the little town of Peekaboo, which is basically where people go for some of the best trout fishing in the world on Silver Creek there. And there's antelope, there's elk down in the bottoms. I saw a lot of elk down in the bottoms and the pastures when I went through there just on Sunday. So really neat area. And then you climb out of there again and you drop down in the little town of Cary, Idaho, which is the easternmost town in Blaine County, which is that county right there. And same bottomland type pastures, and then you come out of Cary, and boom, you're into all these lava fields and into the Craters of the Moon National Monument. And this is probably the one place that Idahoans cannot figure out how to grow a crop, because I tell you what, they grow them all in places I would never imagine. But Craters of the Moon is just so inhospitable. It's just nothing but lava rock for as far as the eye can see. A really fascinating place to go, by the way. And then you break out of Craters of the Moon, and the lava gets sparser and sparser, at least above ground, not below ground, I'm sure. And you move into Arco, Idaho, and you start getting back into some more agriculture, some more pasture land, maybe a little hay ground as you approach Arco, and then back into some BLM, desert, high desert, grazing land. And then after I get through Arco, I turn a little bit to the northeast and head up to Howe, Idaho. And that whole drive from where I turn off till I get to Howe is all just high desert, lots of grazing, sheep and cattle, lots of wildlife, lots of antelope. And then you get into Howe and you make a right-hand turn and you head due east, basically, towards Rexburg. And, man, you get into unbelievable hay country again, just big-time hay country. And when people brag, when I interview people for this show or for the D&B Supply Show, and they talk about us growing the best hay in the nation out here in the Intermountain West, I know people, everywhere you go, they're going to be really proud of what they grow. And I don't know if we truly grow the best hay in the nation, but I know we grow very, very good hay. But you can tell it when you go through Howe in this area of Idaho, because you look at the signs. Simplot has a ton of farms out here growing hay. Stanley Forage. If you're familiar with Stanley Forage, then you know how good a quality of hay they sell. They've got signs out there. They're growing hay in this area. It's just really incredible, all the pivots, all the equipment, and you're going through that area. And then eventually you climb back into the high desert again, and then you drop into the INL. Now, everybody in Idaho knows what the INL is. That stands for the Idaho National Laboratory. This has changed hands or changed names a couple times. I don't know all the history of it, but a very historic part of Idaho involving top secret projects and atomic power and nuclear energy. Really interesting area, and thus the reason why nearby Arco, Idaho was the first city ever to be lit by atomic power. So you actually cross through this, lots of no trespassing signs, you're going to get stopped and a helicopter's going to pick you up or whatever if you get off the road. So it's an interesting area to go through. But right after you pass through the INL, then you come into the town of Mud Lake and then the town of Terraton. And, you can tell these are out in the middle of nowhere towns. They're right by each other. Lots of farming, and if you wonder what the quality of farming is going on out here, all you got to do is just look at the equipment dealers as you go through town. I mean, we're a long way from anywhere in these two towns, and their implement dealers, their equipment dealers, they've got some serious equipment for sale out there, and you can tell how good the farming is out there. So really, really enjoy that. You get out of that, you're back into the high desert a little bit. You actually go over the top of I-15, follow the high desert right into some bottomland pasture areas into Rexburg, Idaho, and you get on Highway 20. And I guess I'm already on it. I'm either on 20 or 26 at this point, but or actually no, because I realize this is probably really boring for all you guys, but I'm on Highway 33 now. Just for those of you in Idaho, or for those of you who are following along on the map. So anyway, you get in. I get on Highway 20 again, and start heading northeast towards Ashton, Idaho, which is eventually going to get me up to West Yellowstone. And man, what a cool experience in agriculture this is when you get into this area. So you go from Rexburg to St. Anthony to Ashton, Idaho along this highway. And there's lots of grazing, lots of horses, lots of cattle, and these bottom lands that flood every now and then from the rivers that are draining out of the Rocky Mountains there. And as you are driving on Highway 20 up towards Ashton, you look off to the east, and bam, there is the Grand Tetons and this just unbelievable range of mountains. Now, there's a lot more going on than just that. And actually, all the way back in Howe, Idaho, you can start to get a glimpse of the tallest peaks, the 3 Grand Tetons. You can start to see those from the west side. But as you get on Highway 20 and you're approaching Ashton, this whole range just lays out in front of you. It is great. But what I'm looking at is what's right on the side of the road, and what I know from my time in going to school up in Bozeman and doing internships in western Montana, southeastern Idaho, and western Idaho, is that they are growing just the finest seed potatoes in the world right there in Ashton, right there in St. Anthony, right there in that whole area. They're growing tons of seed potatoes that are going out all over the world, and you look out on these seed potato fields, and they just disappear on the horizon right at the base, at least seemingly, right at the base of the Grand Tetons. I realize it's not exactly right at the base, but that's what it looks like. Just this unbelievable mountain range. And there's just something, I don't know, there's just something, what's the word, mystical about looking at this crop ground that leads into these unbelievably majestic mountains. And just thinking of just every drawing or picture or whatever you have ever seen about people who lived in medieval times or whatever it was, and they worked in the valleys, but there was these big mountains bordering on one side, or there was flatlanders and there was mountain people and all that. I don't know. There's something about it that speaks to me. You have to see it for yourself. But it is breathtaking. Literally, if you pull off on Highway 20, which I've done a million times, and just got out of the truck and just stood there and looked at the Tetons, they spread out so far north to south, and at this range, at this distance from them, you can't look at them all at once. You do have to turn your head just slightly, or at least move your eyes just slightly, to be able to look at the scope from north to south of this part of the Rocky Mountains at this range. It is breathtaking. It's phenomenal. And I will tell you that the most famous pictures of the Grand Tetons always come from the Wyoming side, always come from that side where you can really get a good look at those three big peaks. But I've been on both sides multiple times, and I think the most majestic look you're ever going to see of the Grand Tetons and of that range is from Ashton, Idaho, is from just south of Ashton, Idaho. I think it's just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, you're standing there, you have to turn your head like you're taking a panoramic photo with your phone to see them all. It is just beautiful. And on a sunny day, like yesterday, or it's Sunday coming home, that's yesterday for me right now as I record this, coming home, they were covered in snow because of all the snow we'd been getting, but yesterday was just so beautiful. Just bright sunshine, crisp blue sky. It was unbelievable coming down and looking at the Tetons in that entire range as we drop down into Ashton and then into St. Anthony. Just unbelievable. And to have this just great seed crop that gets grown, and it's so conducive for growing this great seed crop just right below there, and just having these mountains as the backdrop of this great agriculture. I just love it. It is just fantastic. So you stop. You should pull off on Highway 20 and take that in for a moment. Take some pictures. There's not a camera made that can capture all of it. It's just too big. I'd say that. There probably is one made, but that's my way of expressing it to you. But anyway, after you go through Ashton, you almost immediately cross the Warm River and start this steep ascent onto the Yellowstone Plateau and up towards Island Park, Idaho. And, you know, with all the pine trees and just getting into this forest, you might think that your viewing of agriculture has stopped. But I'm going to give you a tip right now if you ever drive this road. Here's your tip. You're only gonna think that your agricultural tour has ended once you get up into the pines if you fail to stop in Ashton at the Frost Stop Drive-In. Now, you'll notice the Frost Stop Drive-In, Frost Top, I think. They just push those words together. Frost Stop Drive-In on Highway 20 because of the huge mug of root beer that rotates around there right in front of the drive-in. Part of our tradition is we always stop there and we get a huckleberry shake, which are delicious, by the way. And by the way, the huckleberry, we had one on the way up and one on the way down. And I think that's the start of a new tradition. We usually only get them on the way up. But we had two this time, and they were delicious, better than they've ever been. And it probably has something to do with the huckleberry harvest this year. But that huckleberry harvest, that's people walking around up there in the woods and finding the huckleberries and risking their own lives. I mean, grizzly bears love huckleberries, and collecting those things and bringing them down and selling them to places like the Frost Stop so they can use them in their shakes. Delicious. So there's ag up there in those trees in that forest because people are out and they are gleaning, if you will, or they're out picking these huckleberries and other things. It's fantastic. And so you'll miss out on that if you don't stop and get that huckleberry shake. You better stop and get that huckleberry shake. It is very, very good. But anyway, about the time you get done with that huckleberry shake, you'll pass through this long area, this long incorporated area or township or whatever you want to call it, called Island Park, Idaho. And it sits into the, it sits in the forest to the west of the Yellowstone National Park boundary. And then you're going to cross the Henry's Fork of the Snake River. And then, bam, you just come right out into this great high country grazing ground. As far as the eye can see, it's just dotted with cattle all the way to the boundary of Yellowstone, all the way to the pine trees. And as I drive through there, I mean, the grass is tall. It's a beautiful scene to see all these cattle with these majestic peaks behind it, all the pine trees. And then I'm sitting there going, man, how many head are lost to predators every year? Between grizzly bears and wolves, I don't know. Those numbers are out there, but it's just hard for me to imagine how many get lost to predators every year. And pretty soon, you get through the last little piece of Island Park, because it's stretched out for a long ways. And you go up, up, up. You hit the Continental Divide and the Montana border, and you drop down into West Yellowstone country, and you make it over there. And I will tell you, as you're on your way up that Continental Divide, back behind you is Henry's Lake and some of the coolest glacial cut peaks that we have in Idaho are right there to the southwest of Henry's Lake. Really, really beautiful. And then you drop in, and about the time I go over the Continental Divide and we start heading into West Yellowstone, my mind starts to shift from thinking about agriculture to thinking about mountain men and movies like Jeremiah Johnson or The Revenant or whatever, and just trying to think about how people, both white explorers and trappers and Native Americans, how they survived in this country before we had all the modern conveniences we have today. Because it is just enormous, majestic, incredible, incredible country. And we'll stop in West Yellowstone. I'll gas the truck up before heading into the park, so we've got gas to get around for the next few days looking for wildlife. And I'll get back in the truck and I'll go, wow, that was a quick trip. How did we get over here so fast? And this is such a quick drive. Why don't I do it more often? It's awesome over here. It's just absolutely beautiful. But it's that agricultural tour that I get to take each and every year when we do this drive across this fruited Snake River Plain, both to the east and to the west on the way back, that makes it go by so fast. And I wanted to share that with you guys. I don't care if you're on vacation. I don't care what you're doing. There is always agriculture to look at, and it is just a great time to do that. So thanks for letting me be here and be able to talk about my trip to Yellowstone with all of you, and just to share this love of agriculture we've all got. Well, everybody, you enjoy your journey, no matter where it takes you, to the ultimate lifestyle business, and that, of course, is agriculture.